So today we'll look at delay. Basically, the physical parameters which are of interest for a circuit designer, for a digital circuit designer, are delay, power, area, and signal integrity, reliability, etc. So today we'll look at delay. Okay. So what is delay? How do we characterize delay? How do we measure delay? Right? So suppose you have a logic gate, or maybe even a sequence of logic gates, maybe a path. Okay. So what you have is a signal at the input of the gate, say one of the inputs, and here it is being shown as a rising input, and it's going from 0 to VDD. And then as a response to that input, the gate has an output which is going from VDD to ground. So the delay, the propagation delay is measured as the time between the 50% points, or the time when the input reaches the 50% point and the time at which the output reaches the 50% point. The delay, the time difference between the two is considered to be the propagation delay. So this could be the result of the output of a single gate or maybe a path which consists of a sequence of gates. So 50% to 50%. So that is the delay. And if you see here, this is labeled as TPDF, that is propagation delay falling. And then similarly, you have a TPDR, propagation delay rising. Okay. So typically when we talk of a delay of a gate, this is what we refer to, this propagation delay. Delay of a gate or a delay of a path, this is what we are referring to. How long does it take for the output to cross 50% from the time the input has crossed 50%, where 50% is the 50% of the two extreme voltages. In addition, there are two other parameters which are kind of interest and importance. Essentially, that is, those are called the slew rate, the edge time. Different people have different nomenclatures. Really, you would I think the right terminology is slew time. It's just also called slew, as opposed to a rate. Rate is usually 1 by time. So here we are talking of defining time, and this is really capturing the notion of how fast my signal transitions. Okay, that's what is being captured. So here basically the definition is the time required for the signal to change between 80% and 20% of the two values. So for the falling transition, from the 80% point to the 20% point, what is the time required? That is called TF, the falling time, the falling slew. So you could use both of those terminologies. Similarly, the rising slew is the time required to go from 20% to 80%. So that is the definition of the rising slew. So these slews are also very important. We'll kind of see that over the course of the next few lectures in determining the delay of a gate. Okay, the slew rate, the slew time actually has a influence on how fast or how quickly the output changes. As I said, these definitions apply both to a single gate as well as a path, which is a sequence of gates. So if we take a sample piece of a digital circuit, right? So imagine that you have flip-flops out here, one flip-flop for every input. And then similarly you have, so that those flip-flops give the data to this logic block. And then at the outputs, again you have two flip-flops which capture the data. So what you have here is the circuitry in a single pipe stage between flip-flop to flip-flop. Okay. Now, we just want to illustrate the various definitions, the timing definitions which are used to understand the delay of logic of digital circuits, right? So let's start with the path delay. Path delay is basically the delay from input to the output of the path. Okay, so that's, as we discussed in the last slide, it is 50% point to 50% point. So now these delays we are all measuring between 50% points. you also have the, if you see out here, there is something called, A0, A1, A2 till A6, they are what is called an arrival time. So there is the calculation of delay is done with respect to the clock edge. Okay, you have a clock which is periodic in nature, it has a certain time period, right? So every edge of the clock, remember most of the designs we do are synchronous designs and use edge triggered flops. Okay, so there is a rising edge of the flop, so it could be rising or falling edge. We'll just, for this discussion, we'll assume it's rising edge triggered. So as I said, there are some input flops, and there's a rising edge of the flop which captures the data from the previous pipe stage and then gives it to this pipe stage. From the rising edge, what A0 equal to 20 means, it takes 20 time units for that signal to arrive at this particular point I0. Again, what do we mean by saying it takes 20 time units for a signal to arrive? It means that from the rising clock edge, 50% of the rising clock edge to the 50% of I0, the signal at I0 reaching 50% point, it takes 20 units. Similarly, you have arrival times of all these different signals. Now, when we do delay analysis, here I'm kind of saying there's a flip-flop at the input here, but you can take any piece of the logic. For example, you can think of just this section, and you want to do timing analysis of this section. You see out here these A7, A8, those are the arrival time of the signals at those nodes. Again, with respect to the clock edge. Clock edge is happening at time t equal to 0 in that period, and then this is happening at 20 units, 30, 50, etc. Now, the delay of the gate itself is written in these within the gates. So the delay of the NAND2 gate is 30 units. So then the question is, what is the delay at the output of the NAND2 gate? So that delay is calculated based on, you figure out the max of these two. There are two inputs to the NAND2 gate. Okay, so here notice that we are not saying anything about the signal values. Is it going from 0 to 1, 1 to 0 and so on. The assumption is that, clearly for the NAND2, something interesting to happen. Basically, in some way, you have to actually do the analysis for all possible combinations, rising, falling, etc., etc. So if you take these two, A0 and A1, I0 and I1, there are 4 possible combinations. Well, is that 4? You have I0 not changing, I0 changing from high to low, going from low to high. So there are 3 possibilities. Similarly for I1. So 3 times 3, there are 9 possibilities. Okay, so here we are just illustrating, it's not specified for which possibility this is saying, but there are clearly changes happening in I0 and I1, and those changes are happening at 20 units and 30 units respectively from the time the clock edge happens. Now let us assume that and then that change to propagate through the NAND2 gate, you have to see which is the last change which happened. Okay, which is between 20 and 30. 30 is the last one which happened. So the arrival time of the change in A7 is 60. Okay. Now this is not necessarily always the case. For example, suppose I0 and I1 were such that both of them were 1, and one of them went, say I0 went from 1 to 0. See, as soon as I0 goes from 1 to 0, immediately the output will switch, right, to 1. Because in a NAND2 gate, when any of them falls to 0, the output will switch. Only when I0 and I1 both go to 1, the output will fall only when both of them, only after the last one goes to 1 will the output start falling. So there is a notion, what is the right thing to do? Suppose you are asked to find what is the worst case delay between the inputs and outputs. Then you have to use this, the fact that you have to consider the case which will be the slowest. The slowest case will be when both I0 and I1 go from 0 to 1. In that case, the output will fall after the last one goes high, which is 30 units, plus another 30. That means the output will fall low after 60 units. So the transition at A7 or this node 7 here is happening at 60 units. Okay, so that for the worst case calculation, you have to do what is called the max operation. That means you look at the input to any gate. You have a path. For example, you can say a path here is, one of the paths is from I0 through this gate, through the inverter, through this NAND2 gate to OG. I0 to OG is one path. Similarly, I1 to OG is another path, etc. etc. So how many paths are there between input to output? There are 7 inputs, 2 outputs. So 7 to the 14 paths are there. For every path, you can calculate a delay. So if you calculate the delay between I0 and OG, basically 20 and 30, that means the output is 60, and then another 20 at the inverter, so the change at A8 happens at 80, and then you have to see between these two guys which comes later. 80 comes later because here the second input is directly coming from I2, which is changing at 50. So 80 plus 30, 110. So I0 to OG delay is 110. Similarly, I1 to OG is also 110 and so on.
So would it be a problem with inputs of different another times? Like at the output you get malicious outputs.
Okay, so here if you see the inputs are coming at different times.
Inputs are changing at a particular frequency inputs and different input I0, I1, I2. Then there will be malicious outputs at the...
Okay, so perhaps the question is, maybe you are asking the question about what are called hazards. Hazards are something where, here maybe there are multiple transitions in the inputs.
Yes.
An input happens and then after some time again, normally you expect in a synchronous design, in an edge triggered design, at the inputs, which are the outputs of the flops, to change only when the clock edge happens. The clock edge captures the state at the input of the flop and puts it at the output. And that should change only at that time. It should not change at any other time. Okay, once that change happens at the inputs, then for the rest of the clock period it is fixed. And that change propagates down the logic path. But you can have situations where what are called reconversion paths. That means there is for example, here we don't have that example. Maybe say suppose this was coming here from A7 to A10 and perhaps from A10 it again goes back to A9. So a path forks out and then reconverges. And then you could have different delays in those paths, and those kinds of things could lead to momentary what are called glitches at the intermediate nodes, which could propagate all the way down to the output. Those glitches are kind of harmless from a functional point of view. Of course they consume power, but yes, you can have glitches or hazards. But what you want is...
So we should see that every signal should experience equal amount of delay.
No.
Passing through from input to output.
No. So the question is, should we design circuits in a way that every signal has the same delay? Answer is no. It is very difficult to design circuits that way. You get what you get. But there are certain very special circuit styles or microarchitecture style. There is one particular microarchitecture style called wave pipelining, which we'll discuss maybe in later lecture, where it is important to try to have equal delays between all inputs to outputs. But wave pipelining is hardly used much. So in normal designs, we don't really kind of try to get all of them to have equal delays. Okay, the reason is that basically it's just, you don't get much. Okay, there are cases where to deal with hazards, you might want to pad up delays and make. So there's under special circumstances, you do try to match delays, but you don't do it in general for everyone. You don't try to do it, because if you want to have everyone to have equal delays, what is it that you need to do?
We can add the delays.
Exactly. So you need to, if you want to have everyone to have equal delays, you need to basically slow down the fast signals. How do you slow down fast signals? You have to put additional gates, which means more power and more area. So is it worth doing that is the question you have to ask, right? And you don't want to unnecessarily do that. It's fast, fine, let it come and wait. Okay, there's no harm. So, absolutely right. The question is, are the gate delays constant or will they change with temperature and voltage? Yes, they do change with temperature and voltage and with age. That is the other problem. You have a chip now, after 3 years of using a cell phone, things start becoming slower. Perhaps it's because of the aging and gates have become slower. Okay, so of course your circuitry needs to be able to adapt to that. If you are running at the same constant frequency, then your thing will not slow down, it will just die suddenly one day. Okay, we'll see why that will happen. See, because, yeah.
Different path delays,
Hmm.
occur glitches, right?
Yes.
Because that will happen in different time span.
No. Okay, so that is what I was explaining. The important thing is you have, say, in the synchronous design, you have a flop, bunch of flops. Every input has a flop. Similarly, every output has a flop. You launch the signals into this pipe stage at the clock edge. Similarly, you capture the signal at the output at the clock edge. So if you have imagine a clock period with two edges, the beginning of the period and the end of the period. So you have that much time for signals to propagate and settle by the time the next clock edge comes. So if you see,
20 is not time units there. So suppose at one edge we have whatever a transition. If we say the delay is 20 time units, that is the entire clock period, is it?
no. 20 here is the delay of just this gate.
Yes, but 20 of the clock period time.
No. We are not worrying about what the unit of time is. It could be
So
nanosecond.
it is much lesser than the clock period.
Absolutely, yes. So the 20, the delay of a gate is much lesser than the clock period. Typically, a clock period would be about, maybe the fastest designs will have clocks which are about 12 to 14 gate delays. Okay, those will be the fastest microprocessors, we have 12 to 14, which means in a pipe stage you will have a sequence of maybe 12 gates. Your path will not be longer than 12 gates. Okay, those are like the fastest designs you can make. But typically in chips, other than the high performance chips, the delays would probably be between maybe 20, 40 gates, maybe even 100 gates. So the delay of a single gate would be maybe 5% or maybe even 1% of the overall clock period. So it really depends on that comes down to the microarchitecture. What kind of microarchitecture, which tells me what is the pipe depth, how many gates are there on an average between the input and the output flops. So here so what you have is the arrival time at the outputs 9 and 12 are 110 and 140. Okay, so those are the path delays from input to OG and O12. And let us say your clock period, someone said your clock period is 130. Okay, that's what your clock period is, 130 units. Then you see that the arrival time at O9, that is not OG, O9 is 20 units ahead of time. So you have some slack, positive slack. You have come ahead of time, you can use that slack and spend it. How do you spend it? Maybe you can slow down that path. Because your clock period is 130, why should you come so early? Because if you come so early, perhaps by slowing down you can save some power and area. Okay, so that is positive slack. Whereas the O12, that signal at the output of O12 has come 10 units later, so negative slack. So you have to do something to speed it up. Okay, you have to increase the size or maybe look at reorganizing the logic. You have to preserve the functionality. You can't do away with it, but you have to do something to get the slack, cut the negative slack. Now, if you see out here, if someone said, okay, what is the clock period, the maximum or what is the fastest clock I can have, and this circuit will work properly? 140, right? Because you have to look at the slowest path. You have to look at what is called the max delay. You take your pipe stage, you look at the path which has the maximum delay, and you have to make sure your clock edges are spaced apart at least by that much. Because if you space it any lower than that, the guy with the slowest person will not be able to finish the job in time. So that is called the critical path. The critical path is the path which has the largest delay. So now imagine you have multiple pipe stages like this in your design. All pipe stages have there's the same clock which goes. The clock period is fixed. That means the clock period is then defined by the worst case path across all the pipe stages. Right? The worst case path will set the maximum clock frequency or the minimum clock period you can use. Any slower than that, the circuit will fail. So that is called the critical path. Now that is associated with this concept of setup time, which we'll discuss when we discuss flip-flop designs. Basically, essentially it's got to do with the fact that if you want to capture the signal at a flop, at the receiving end. We have a flip-flop, there is an edge-triggered flop, the edge captures the signal. The signal has to come and be ready and be set up some minimum time before the edge happens. That is called the setup time. Similarly, the signal has to remain stable for some minimum time after the edge happens. That is called the hold time. So those two have to be preserved for it to be captured. And it turns out, we'll again when we discuss hold time, that you also don't want signals to go too fast. So imagine that there was no gate, there was just a single piece of wire from I7 to O12. Okay. The first clock edge happens, the signal goes on I7 and it's supposed to be captured in the second clock edge. In that period, you have a initiating clock edge and the capturing clock edge. But the signal is so fast that it gets captured by the same clock edge at the receiving side. So which is wrong, which is not right. Okay, so you don't want that to happen. So that means there has to be a minimum delay also. So that is called the min delay. So gates, so paths, all paths have to have a certain min delay and certain max delay. We'll come to this min delay, max delay and set up hold time. Again, we'll revisit this when we are looking at flip-flops and sequential circuits and so on. So let's look at the delay of a single gate now, right? So what we said was the delay is defined to be the time between 50% of the input to 50% of the output. And basically what is happening, let us say the input is a ramp which goes up, it has a certain slew time, SIR. Stands for slew and IR means input rise. So input could rise, input could fall. So there are two possible numbers there, slew IR, slew IF. Similarly, output could rise, output could fall. For a single gate, it's always an inverting gate. But when you discuss in terms of a path could be inverting or non-inverting, we don't know, right? It could be both. Both can happen. So if you look at the output of any gate, it's essentially some capacitance is there. Some load capacitance due to wire, the gate capacitance of the next gate, its own self capacitance and so on. And when you have a certain current being drawn out of that capacitor to discharge the capacitors, let us take the case when input is going from 0 to 1, output is falling. That means NMOS is turned on and it is pulling down the current, so so the voltage will start falling. So CL dV0 by dt is equal to minus I. So now you integrate this. So the time required to go from VDD to VDD by 2, okay, that is basically CL by dV0. You have this. So this gives me the time required to discharge from VDD to VDD by 2. So the thing is that, okay, till this point it's very simple and straightforward. You have a simple differential equation, you invert it, you have an integral equation, you solve it, you get it. The problem is the terms inside this integral, CL and I, they really depend on the input voltage, output voltage, the slew, input slew, output slew. It's a very complex function, CL. Similarly, I, which is the current. Remember, the current, it depends on which regime the transistor is. Transistor is initially starts off in sub-threshold, goes to saturation, then gets back to linear and then shuts off. So again, I is a function of V0 and Vi. So these equations are very complex, and really the way to accurately solve them is through numerical techniques, and that is what simulators like SPICE do. They actually solve these integral equations by doing numerical integration, right? And then they will have they can solve it very accurately because they will have the values of currents, capacitances, etc. as a function of the instantaneous voltages. Okay, but for us to get some understanding and intuition, right, this is where we have to simplify the models of how we think about these circuits, because otherwise it just becomes horrendous. You can't keep going to the simulator all the time. Really, the way you do the design is you use some basic understanding and intuition to come up with an initial design with some initial sizing and so on. Then you refine it using the simulator. Okay, and then the simulators now provide very powerful tools, optimization tools and so on, so you can really get the simulator to really get that extra last 1 picosecond out of your gate. Okay, but to get going, you need to have some understanding, and that's where the next few slides will introduce some very simple models of understanding what determines the delay of a gate. Okay, so really what we say is that in reality, the delay, which is the propagation delay, whether it's fall or rise, or the slew, the output slew, is a function of the capacitances, the sizes of the transistors, both N and P, the input slew also, and and these functions are kind of complex. And again, really to deal with these, what we do is we make some simple approximations, which work reasonably well when the slews are all reasonable. Okay, that means the input slew rate is similar to the output slew rate. Then we can express the delays, the propagation delays, to be a simple RC equation, R times C. Okay, you have an effective resistance for both pull up, so you have for fall and then for pull down. So when I'm pulling up, that is rise time, I have an effective resistance for the pull up. Here I'm showing a simple inverter, but it can be any CMOS gate. There is a pull up network, pull down network. You have an effective resistance for the whole pull up network, effective resistance for the whole pull down network. So that resistance times the capacitance is basically the delay. And the resistances are determined or are related or proportional to the sizes we use. Okay, and so these proportionality constants and so on, which you can easily obtain by simulations. You simulate some simple circuits, you will get the proportionality constant. So then you will have an idea for, okay, this much microns of width means this many kilo ohms. So if I want this much delay, then I need so many kilo ohms, so I'll use this size. So you can do that kind of simple hand calculations to get you the sizes of the transistors used. Typically we want to have the rise and fall delays to be matching, but that's not always the case. There are occasions where, as I said, you want to skew the gates. You make the rising faster than the falling and so on, but when you don't have any preference, you try to make the effective resistance of the pull up and pull down network to be the same. When the mobilities are off by a factor of 2, that means PMOS is slower by a factor of 2 to NMOS, you have to double the size of the PMOS to get the same effective resistance. So this is the simple model of a transistor. Any transistor, what we do is we replace it with a ideal switch. This is only for digital design, okay, and for delay calculation. We replace it with an ideal switch with a series resistor R. Okay, and then it has some capacitances. There is a capacitance associated with the gate of the transistor, CG. There is a capacitance associated with the source and the drain. Remember, source and drain are diodes. So there is and those diodes are reverse biased. So there is a reverse biased diode capacitance. And here what we have is W by L. W is the width and L is the length, and essentially these are, and essentially in the text and in this course we'll assume the drain, source and gate capacitances are all equal. They're kind of almost similar to each other, not exactly the same, but just to keep our life simple for these calculations, we'll assume all three are equal. Let's look into this capacitances a little bit. We haven't kind of seen it so far. You already know of this capacitance between the gate and the channel, because there is an oxide or an insulation between the gate and the channel, and whenever you have charge separated by insulation, there is a capacitance. In fact, whenever you have electric field, you have capacitance, right? So you also have electric field from the side of this gate. The gate has some thickness, and from the side also you have electric field. So you have some capacitance on the side. So this is called CGS overlap. See, out this region out here, there is a small amount of overlap also. So you have some fringing field as well as some overlap capacitance. Fringing fields are fields which come out from the side. not from the bottom plate of the capacitor, but from the side plates of the capacitor. Those are called the fringing fields. Okay, and then you have this reverse bias diodes out here, which also gives you a capacitance. So if you look out here, this is the kind of the model of the transistor. You have this transistor and then you have capacitance between every pair of nodes. There are 4 nodes. Every pair of nodes there is a capacitor. CGS, CGD, CDB, the drain to bulk, source to bulk. Okay, so on the left side there is some layout which is drawn. I'll probably come to the layout. We'll kind of discuss this, but I just want to point out something out here. So what is drawn out here is a NAND 2 gate. Okay, a NAND 2 gate, this is one transistor and this is the gate of the transistor. Okay, so this is the width in this overlap region and then this is the length. And then similarly this is the second transistor, and in a NAND 2 the two transistors are in series. That means this guy's drain source, his source is connected to the drain of the next transistor, and then it comes down and here you will connect it to perhaps ground. So the current flows like this through these two. Now if you see this structure out here, you have this much area is all N plus, is the diffusion. Similarly the lower guy has a certain diffusion. So this gives you certain capacitance. Capacitance of the diffusion regions of the two transistors plus some capacitance from the metal which is shorting the two diffusions. So this hatched, you see this rectangle which has this hatched blue hatch, that is the metal. Now you see what has been done here, these two transistors have been brought closer together such that they have a common diffusion area, and then this black is actually a contact. It's a hole from the metal to the diffusion to make a connection from the diffusion. So now this has a distance of 6 lambda, which you can't probably see very clearly in the projection, but on this guy there is 5 lambda plus 5 lambda 10 lambda is the total distance between the two transistor gates. Here it's 6 lambda, and here this contact has also been removed because maybe I don't want to tap and touch that signal. It's some, I don't care about that signal. It's just hidden signal, internal signal. I bring these two even closer. So now these two transistors are even closer as 3 lambda. Lambda is just a unit of distance. Okay, so that means the area of the capacitance of the source drain capacitance has been changed based on how we have done the physical layout. So physical layout is very important to determine what is the exact source drain, exact parasitic capacitance you have. Okay, so just to show that the physical design has an impact on the capacitance, which then has an impact on the delay. So really, if you want to get the final picture of how fast or how slow your circuit works, until you go down to the layout and really look at all the geometries and all the parasitics, these are called parasitic capacitances because you really don't want them, but you get them whether you like it or not. You will not get the true picture of the delay, because delay is resistance times capacitance. You need both. Resistance is of course determined by the size of your transistor. Capacitance is determined by size as well as how you actually draw the layout. So till you do finish that, you will not get the full picture.
So actually, what is the output contact on the last?
So here now you just take a contact of this from here, from the top and the bottom. The bottom will probably be connected to ground if it's a NAND 2 gate, and the top will be the output. And then you will have similarly 2 parallel PMOS transistors whose output will be connected here. So that will give you the NAND 2 gate. Which between these two, see between these two clearly this is better, okay, because because I can still get a contact out from the center. I can, there is some reason probably if you wanted to get connection to the internal node, you need to have a contact, and this gives me the minimum area layout, whereas this is much larger. And if I didn't want a contact, then putting a contact will just add to the area, which is not helping me. So I would rather do the layout out on the third layout, the smallest one. Okay, so you have a lot of capacitances. Okay, but on top of it, these capacitances, as I said, are also functions of the voltages. So what is being plotted out here, unfortunately this didn't come out very clearly, but really this is the capacitance, the instantaneous capacitance is dq by dV, right? That is an instantaneous capacitance at that particular voltage. So capacitance is a function of voltage, and then what is being shown is the capacitances at different voltages, the small signal capacitance. That means I change the voltage by a small amount, I look at how much charge is being put or removed. That ratio dq by dV is giving me that instantaneous, that small signal capacitance, and that is a function of the voltages and so on. And this essentially it is a voltage dependent capacitance. So it's kind of a complex situation. But as digital designers, we simplify things. We just use one number for the capacitance per unit area. Of course, that number could be different for source drain regions, could be different for gate regions, but still we use one number, and then that number per unit area is multiplied with the actual area of the layout. Okay, so here the area of the drain is essentially this much, the product of, let's take this, D times W is the area of the source. Similarly, D times W is the area of the drain. Okay, the area of the gate is W times L. And the perimeter, remember this drain and gate also have, drain regions and source regions also have a certain depth here. So there is also sidewall capacitance. So you also have a perimeter out here. The perimeter is D plus W plus D in the back side plus another W on this side. So similarly you have, right? So what you have is you have one number multiplied by the area of the source and the perimeter of the source. The thing is that what changes from as a circuit designer, you play around with these areas, because based on the layout you get different areas. But the constants are something you get from the process. Of course, the constants are a function of voltage and so on. How do you deal with it? You just get one number which kind of gets you the right answer. Okay, so that's basically what you do for simple calculations. So now this is my simplified model. What you have is, you have the gate capacitance is also a function of the voltage. So what I do is I come up with an effective gate capacitance, where if I were to use that number Cg times VDD, when I charge the gate from 0 to VDD, the amount of charge I put in is the same as what I would in the actual gate. The actual gate, I have the input, the capacitance as a function of voltage. I integrate with voltage and I get some charge, the same charge I get. Is essentially taking an average. The important thing is this single number Cg is also essentially proportional to W. W just is linearly dependent on W. So that makes life simple. So really I can say the gate capacitance is Kg, some constant, times W. Same goes for the drain and the source capacitances. Remember, the drain and source capacitances are the capacitances from here to the drain and source junctions to ground. And the area, for example, of the drain or source region is also proportional to W. Larger the W, larger is the area, linearly related. Okay, so I will have drain capacitance also Kd times W. So both drain and source capacitances are just simple linear functions or linear related to W, and the linearity constants, the proportionality constants, just a few simulations will tell you what the constant is. Then you can use it for the rest of the design. Okay, so we have kind of taken that very complex model and simplified it. Okay, so that you can do some hand calculations and you'll get some quick answers to the delay numbers as well as power numbers. Now what R should I use? I use an R such that R times C gives me the delay which I measure. Okay, so we are using this fitting business. So really the important thing is, if you take these R's and C's, they are in some sense average values. Okay, they are capturing the average, but they do linearly depend on the size of the transistor. So if I take the transistor and make it K times bigger, the width, I keep the length same, I make the size K times bigger, the resistance drops by K, capacitance goes up by K. Right, all the three capacitances, source, drain and gate. Same for the PMOS.
Length or width?
For width, okay, not for length, only for width. length comes in the inverse. So so basically you have the okay, so basically you have the length and the width. But remember, see, this is again when you come very close to the smallest minimum width and length. If you remember the graph I showed you about the reverse short channel effect, reverse narrow width effect, and so on. So you have some complications there. Okay, so we are kind of ignoring those complications. We are not getting into that regime. We are looking at the larger size transistors where those kind of non-idealities are not coming into the picture. And to a reasonably good approximation, you can say, as I increase my width to k times, my resistance drops by k times, capacitance goes up by k times. But if you want to always exactly get that, the way then to do that is to not increase the width by k times, but replicate the transistor k times. Okay, so you have a certain transistor of unit size, and someone says, give me a transistor which is 1/k the resistance. So you make k copies of it, provided k is an integer, of course. If k is not integer, you get to the closest integer and you get there. So that will guarantee you, correct replication. If you just say I'm going to take the width and multiply it by k, then you have those problems which we discussed, right? Especially when widths are small, you have the narrow width effects and so on. And even for large widths, there are some issues out there. So the best way to really have this multiplication is to have replication of the transistor. That goes not only for digital design, but also for analog design. If you want some current source and another current source which is k times this, don't just increase the width by k times, but have k copies. That will give you the best approximation for multiplication by k. So what you now have is I take any gate. For example, here what we have is a NAND 3 gate. Okay, there are 3 series NMOS transistors, 3 series PMOS transistors. So now we replace every transistor by its equivalent. Of course, we are not putting the resistances here because it just clutter up the whole thing. But really, for every transistor, you have a capacitance in the bottom and capacitance in the top. Okay. Now let us look at the sizes. The sizes are 3, 2, and so on. What are the units? It's some arbitrary unit. We will not worry about it. For example, there could be a certain minimum size transistor you might want to use in your design. That minimum size could be perhaps half a micron or something. That I will say 1 unit. Okay, and then I'll do all the sizing of everything else in terms of that, so that just things become simpler to kind of describe. So you have 3 units here and 2 units here. So for the 2 units, since the size has gone up by 2, the capacitances of the source and drain have also gone up by 2. If a single transistor has C as the capacitance, this guy has 2C, 2C, the 3 unit transistor has 3C. Now if you see out here something funny is, so let us look at this transistor. At the gate input it is 3C, which is fine. Source, the drain region is also 3C. Source is 3C. But then here there should have been the 3C from the drain of the one below. So it should have been 6C, but it is 3C. Why is it just 3C? Because we are assuming that in these kinds of layout, you are sharing the source drain region, like we discussed in this layout. Sorry. Right here, there is some sharing going on. Okay, in both of these. So we are kind of saying that we don't count that capacitance 2 times because it's not the right thing, because the layout already has been smartly done to share. So typically when you have series stack, you really want to share and not have extra capacitance. So you have 3C, 3C, 3C. Okay, similarly if I take any PMOS, gate is 2C because the size of the PMOS is 2 and the source and drain regions are also 2C. Now if I look at the pull down, now I just focus on the pull down, what I have is I replace it with the RC equivalent. The bottom transistor has size of 3, let us say the unit transistor has resistance of R, then the bottom transistor's resistance, each of these transistors' resistance is R by 3 because they are 3 times bigger. Okay, so R by 3. So this becomes the RC network for the falling transition. For the rising transition, let us look at this. So now this kind of looks funny out here. But really what we are saying is Let us assume that rising is happening because one of the input has gone from high to low. Let us say all three inputs were high to begin with, and one of them has gone to low. And let us say the bottom one has gone to low. When the bottom one goes to low, the top two inputs are still high. When the bottom one goes to low, this transistor shuts off. Okay, and one of the PMOSes turns on, the remaining two are off, and then but these two are still on. So the RC network becomes R for the PMOS. Remember, again in this textbook, of course we are kind of assuming that the PMOS mobility is half that of NMOS. So a PMOS of size 2 has the same resistance as an NMOS of size 1. So PMOS of size 2 has a resistance R connected to the output, and the output capacitance is 9C. Why? Because there is 2C, 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 6C from the 3 PMOSes, and then 3C from the drain capacitance of this NMOS in the top. So that is 9C. So output capacitance is 9C. This is just the self capacitance. It's not the capacitance of the load. It's just the self capacitance of the gate. And then you have an R by 3 from the top transistor because it's on, and that is connected to the 3C in between these two, and then R by 3 of this transistor to 3C. So this becomes the equivalent RC network for rising. This is the equivalent RC network for falling. Remember, for falling, all three inputs have to go high, which means all three PMOSes have to shut off. So the PMOSes are not contributing anything other than the parasitic capacitances of which leads to 9C at the output. So this is the equivalent RC network for rising and falling. So really now the
PMOS capacitance.
what is the PMOS capacitance?
What about PMOS capacitance in this circuit?
Yes, so the PMOS capacitance is coming in here because you see the output Y. The Y capacitance is essentially you have 2C, 2C and 2C. So 6C from the 3 PMOSes and then another 3C from the NMOS. So totally you have a capacitance of 9C out here. Okay, that's what is coming in here. Now so you see where we are going. We want to convert the delay calculation problem into just calculating RC time constants. So that is the simplest thing you can do. So, but really with C's to consider. The C's at the top, for example, you take these two inverters. The first inverter has, again, if I replace it with a resistance and a capacitance at the inputs, at the source and drain region, here and here. But the capacitance at the drain, at the top and the bottom don't play any picture in the delay calculation because they're shorted. Okay, so they go out of the picture. It's only the internal capacitances which affect the delay. So if you look at this gate, whose input is A, he has a R and a 2C and R and C out here from the PMOS and NMOS, and that is connected to Y which connects to the inputs of the next inverter. That input of the next inverter provides or presents a load of C at the NMOS and 2C at the PMOS. So this becomes the RC picture of for this inverter, the first inverter. Self capacitance at the source drain region due to itself plus the gate capacitance of the next gate. Okay. So the total capacitance is 2 plus 2 4 plus 2 6, 6C. And resistance is R. Whether I am pulling up or pulling down, resistance is the same. So in some sense the delay of this gate is about 6 RC. Whether I am delay of which gate? Delay of this gate. The first gate. Pardon?
Delay of the complete.
Of just the first gate. That means the delay of A rising to Y falling or A falling to Y rising, and we are looking at 50% to 50% point. Right? So the propagation delay. We are not even talking about the slew time 80, 20, 20, 80 because those calculations are kind of more complex, and for this kind of hand analysis it's kind of not really worth going there. And that is where I said earlier in one of the slides that we kind of make an assumption that the slew times are all reasonable. What is reasonable? I'll kind of tell you a little bit later, but something which you would get when everything is sized reasonably well. Okay, whatever slew you get, we assume all the slews are that. Okay, for something like that, this kind of hand-based calculation is reasonably okay in terms of accuracy. Now, really what we have done is we have an RC system. So let's take a simple first order RC system, right? When you have a step, let us say the input goes from high to low, and you have a resistor and a capacitor. What happens to the output? Output starts falling. There is this exponential decay, right? V out is VDD times e to the tau by t, minus tau by t. Okay, so it just falls. And so if you look at the 50% point, that 50% point is TPD is equal to RC log 2. So if you were to measure 50% to 50%, there is R times C times log 2. So what happens to log 2? We say log 2 is part of R. We'll just subsume it as part of R. Because how do we calculate R? R is anyway calculated by fitting it. We take a unit inverter, we find the delay, and then we say there is some capacitance, and then we say the equivalent R is whatever R which gives me R times C equal to that delay. So in some sense log 2 is kind of taken into it. So we don't use log 2, we use just cumbersome notation. That is okay for a single first order system. Second order system, we have 2 R's and 2 C's. Then it becomes more complex, the transfer function. And then your time constant, what we simplify. We say that one of them dominates, one of the poles, there are 2 poles, and we approximate this by a first order system who's with an equivalent time constant of this much. R1 C1 plus R1 plus R2 C2. R1 C1 plus R1 plus R2 times C2. Okay, and then if you see the graphs here, it's kind of not that bad, within a few percent, 7% or so you're there. Okay, so that is kind of what we'll use for simple hand calculations. Okay, if you want accurate calculations, then you have SPICE and you do full numerical integration with the actual models. There's no point going in between the second order more detailed formula. Right? Either you have simple formula or you have very complex formula which you do accurately. There is no point in having kind of semi-simple, and you're not neither accurate nor will you make your life easy. So we'll make use the simple formula of first order time constants. Time constant or the dominant determined by the dominant poles. Now in general, if I have typically you see that when I have a gate driving a gate with some complex stack, pull up or pull down stack driving a lot of other gates, you can model it as whether the pull up or pull down as some kind of a RC network, an RC tree. Actually it turns out to be like a tree. And in such trees, Elmore in early 1940s had come up with a formula, simple formula for calculating the delay. Okay, the RC time constant, and it's essentially the product. You take all the nodes in the network, and each has a capacitance Ci, and from the root of the tree, say you want to find the delay from the root of the tree to a certain output. Okay, so there is a certain path to the tree. But then there are a lot of other capacitances. So you take the resistance in the path, multiply it with all the downstream capacitances, and you just sum it up. So that is the formula we use. When you do a few examples, it will become clear how to do it. So let us take the example of your NAND 3. Let us say this NAND 3 gate is loaded with H other identical gates. H is some integer. There are maybe 5, 6, 10, whatever it is. That means this guy, the output Y is connected to the input, one of the inputs of H other gates. Okay, so what is the loading on due to that, the gate inputs? You take any input, it goes to gate of size 3 for the NMOS and gate of size 2 for the PMOS. So total capacitance at any input is 5 C, right? And if there are H such gates, the load capacitance is 5HC. So whether I am doing pull down or pull up, there is a load capacitance due to 5HC. Plus, we already saw there is a parasitic capacitance, the self capacitance, due to 2C from each of the PMOSes and 3C from the top NMOS, which is 9C. So 9 plus 5HC is the load here. And then you have the others remain the same. Okay, this is for the pull down and this is for the pull up. Again, we are looking at the worst case. Pull up delay, because when you do timing analysis, someone asks you what is the slowest, what is the maximum clock period or clock frequency you can run this circuit at. You have to figure out under what conditions will give you the slowest delay in your path. Everything has to be slow. So even within your gate itself, you have to consider the input, which is the worst and which will give you the slowest delay for the gate.
Then how do you say that you switch off the last transistor and that will
See, because firstly, if all three go low, then all three PMOSs help to charge up. Correct. So you need to turn. Now, which one do you turn on? So now, if you just shut off the top one, then the lower capacitances are isolated, so they don't affect the delay. Right. Whereas if you turn on the lowest one, you are really making the pull-up has to not only charge the output capacitance, but also has to supply charge to the intermediate capacitances out here. So that is why the lowest one is the worst case, because you need to put more charge in there. So now if you look at this guy, let us apply Elmore. So now we want to find the delay for pull down. That means from ground, because Y has to go to 0. That is why we are pulling it down. So from the ground node, what is the delay to Y? So this is my RC tree. Okay. So what I do is I take a resistance in the path and then multiply with all downstream capacitances. Okay, so I take R by 3 multiplied with 3, this whole thing. Okay, plus this R by 3 times these two guys, and then this R by 3 times this. Okay. So let us take this R by 3 times all the capacitances downstream to it. That is 3C plus 3C plus 9 plus 5HC. Let's, right? So that is 9 plus 3, 12 plus 3, 15. So R by 3 times 15 is 5 RC. And then this R by 3 times 12, which is 4 RC, plus this R by 3 times 9, which is 3 RC. So that becomes 12 plus 5 HRC. Similarly, for the pull-up, we can do the calculations and you get this number. So you can read the text. There are a few more examples. Just go through the examples and make sure you follow this Elmore delay calculation principle. Any other questions? Okay, so the question is, what is this H? We are just saying let H be the number of NAND2 gates which are being driven by this guy. So Y, the output Y, it is not shown in the picture, but there are H copies of the same gate on the receive side. This gate is driving those H copies. So that is why the capacitance and the input capacitance of each gate is 3 plus 2, 5C. And since there are H of them, the total capacitance is 5HC at the output Y plus its own internal parasitic capacitance of 9C. H is the fan out, exactly. H is the fan out, because I'm making this gate drive H copies of itself, so H is basically the fan out. So the question is, why do we take the sidewall capacitance as per unit length? See, because if you take the sidewall, right, the sidewall is basically defined by this plate out here, which is the vertical plate. And the depth of the vertical plate is something which as a designer you have no control. That's what when they manufacture the transistor, there is a certain depth of the diffusion implant. So the only thing as a designer you can change is this dimensions. You can change D and you can change W by doing the appropriate drawing. So you can only change one dimension. That is why you just specify it as a per unit length. Whereas the area for the bulk capacitance, the whole area you can change. So it's specified as per unit area. So the question is, in the RC model, how do we get the 9C value? So if you see out here, every transistor we are replacing it with the linear, that simple RC model. R is not being shown, but this transistor has a width of 2, so its source, drain and gate capacitance all get multiplied by a factor of 2 from the unit transistor. Unit transistor is assumed to have a capacitance C, so this becomes 2C. So now each of these transistors at this node Y contributes a capacitance of 2C, because there are 3 transistors, each one contributes 2C, and you see all these 3 capacitors are in parallel. Similarly, the drain capacitance of this top transistor, NMOS transistor, is also 3C. It is correct. Okay, so now the total capacitance, there are 6C capacitance connected to VDD and 3C connected to ground. Now you should remember that the assumption is that the VDD is a ideal power source with a impedance of 0. So as far as this kind of analysis goes, it's basically a short.
So what kind of analysis is not as its identical gates? If it is not as its identical gates, what will happen?
So the question is, what if there are the output, you don't have H identical gates? So it doesn't matter. So suppose the output is something where the load capacitance is CL, some CL due to something, wire, etc. That's how typically what happens. So then here in this model it becomes 9C plus CL. That's all.
But if it is not identical gates, then calculation.
Yes, you have to actually add up the capacitance due to every gate input which this signal is driving to, and each gate, if it's a different gate, you have to take that particular value and consider it. Yes. Okay, so the question is, why is the resistance in the pull-up network of the PMOS not R by 2 and R? So what we have said here is, in the textbook and in this course, we will assume that the PMOS has twice the resistance of the NMOS of the same size. Okay, so we take a unit transistor which has a size 1 for an NMOS, and we say let that value of the resistance be R and capacitance be C. So all these units are in terms of multiples of that. So PMOS of size 1 will have resistance of 2R, because the mobility we are saying is half. So PMOS of size 2 will have half the resistance. So that resistance is R.